Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to today's Resident Engagement Supply Chain Support Masterclass. My name is Alex Kramer-Smith and I'm a Junior Sustainability Consultant at Turner & Townsend. And we're joined today by Julian Boss, a Principal Consultant from Turner & Townsend also. Just to inform you, this is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner & Townsend. We've been given the following information from the department. So just so you're aware, we're only able to comment or provide clarifications on the draft wave 3 guidance, which was published earlier in May at this time. And we cannot comment on timings or next steps for SHDF Wave 3 or any other government schemes. When we're able to share anything further, we will do so. Thanks for joining, and I'm now going to hand over to Julian to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome to this session, everyone. My name is Julian Boss. I'm a Principal Consultant with Turner & Townsend and have been involved in all of the retrofit kind of programs recently from the government, the SHDF programs. So just to move on, the agenda for today's session: why does engaging residents matter from a contractor point of view? Learning from previous retrofit projects, engagement stages, competent engagement considerations, and RISE resident engagement support. So the resident engagement, the reason that it is crucial to projects is basically having residents on board, particularly social housing residents. When we're doing the social housing, big residential social housing retrofit projects, it's very easy for a lack of engagement to then lead to a lack of uptake and people and residents just not allowing people to access the properties. And once that starts to happen, the project is really very much at risk of failing. People have a very emotional connection to their homes, whether they're tenants or homeowners. And for tenants, there's also a sense of having less control over major decisions about their homes. So it's important to think about retrofit as something that is being done with and for people rather than simply being done to a building. So being clear and open in engagement with people. And actually, that's engagement, not just with residents, that you can think about that in terms of all the wider partners within this, within the different teams, within, say, a project, having clear and open engagement so that people are very honest about how a project is going. It makes the whole process feel easier for everybody. The second point in there is an important one there. Retrofit projects, larger retrofit projects, are often very complex and can involve all sorts of different measures being installed externally and internally to properties. And in most cases, this is all done with residents still in situ. Some cases not, if it's a very, very deep retrofit, maybe an NFIT project or something like that, where residents might be moved out because the level of works are so deep that no one could carry on living in those properties. But that is going to be unlikely to be part of a kind of funded social housing program. Those kind of works are often invasive and disruptive for large projects, for large complex projects. So it's very important to kind of realize the impact on residents, all sorts of different people. Some residents obviously are out at work during the day, but a lot of people with young children, or maybe older people who are retired, or people who have disabilities might well be at home and having to kind of live through a lot of noise, dust, and other kind of disruptive effects from the building works. So the last point on that list there, helping to identify where data is missing, that is an important point in the sense that when we're working on residents' properties, actually we can discover different bits that might be missing from a data set that the housing landlord has to do with maybe the age of particular heating systems or to do with the type of windows that might be installed. I mean, it's very easy for this data, when it's a great big sort of data set for hundreds or thousands of homes, to have the wrong data in. As an installer, you can be presented with data which says X, Y, Z is the case for this property. And actually, when you get there, that isn't the case. It might It might affect the work that you're meant to be doing. It might not, but it's certainly an opportunity to update that information. So what happens when things go wrong? Key reasons that projects like this can go wrong. Some of those I'll just cover sort of separately. People don't invest in retrofit. So this is thinking about the residents. 2/3 of residents across 10 years don't actively consider retrofit improvements. Of those who are not considering any improvements, the most common reason for this is that they believe their home is already efficient enough. Also, they don't own their own home, therefore they don't feel that kind of connection to energy efficiency. Although with the latest heating bills rises, although those have dropped back a little bit, I'm sure people are maybe changing opinion about that, but there is definitely a disconnect if you're a tenant in a home. And the other thing is that for residents who do own their own home, those or leaseholders, the changes do cost too much money. That is another big, barrier for people. Assuming that every home is the same is also difficult because most homes have changed or been adapted over the years, whatever they started off as, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Lots of things are likely to have been changed at a different rate at different times, so that they're currently actually quite different and need a bespoke solution for each home. In order to understand those differences, it can be helped by trying to identify house typologies with similar characteristics, and perhaps through direct resident engagement and feedback. Quite often, if you're working with with a contractor who is delivering all the way through a project, there will be quite a lot of resident engagement just to understand exactly what is going on at a particular house, in terms of the type of family that's living there, what other things are going on in terms of the things that the contractor should be aware of. And it can be to do with maybe people are taking care of elderly or otherwise handicapped or disabled people within that home, and they might have all sorts of considerations related to that situation. These 3 points on the slide directly do make a big impact and do lead to a potentially high risk of project failure. So just thinking about that first point, inadequate engagement can lead to low uptake by residents. That can be almost contagious, actually. I have heard of projects where literally everybody has refused to have work done because a certain kind of message has maybe wrongfully been sort of taken up by a particular person within a residential group, and they've spread that thought and that kind of approach to all their neighbours, and everybody has decided that they would rather not have work done. Low uptake can lead to allocated funding being unspent. So basically, whoever the client is, if there has been sort of public funding for that project, low uptake, money has to be handed back. Unspent funding then eventually might lead to the collapse of the project. So it sort of underpins everything about the delivery, successful or otherwise, of this project, is having the kind of residents really on board. And the more on board they are, the more part of the process they are, the more maybe errors or failings or mistakes within the process, which does happen. Windows turn up and it turns out that they're being measured wrong, or they're being made to the wrong size, being measured correctly. Whatever happens, delays can ensue. And actually, if residents are completely on board with that, they understand that these things happen, and actually they're very understanding of such things happening and don't kick up too much fuss about it. So it's very, very kind of effective to have close communication with residents all the way through. So just understanding what's needed. Each resident will have unique needs in terms of the project you're working on. As I say, the different residents in some of the social homes can vary from, a young working couple through to young families, through to older retired couples, single people, and everything in between. Each of them will have a very different kind of hopes, expectations, and be sensitive to disruption in different ways. It's crucial to begin early with appropriate and suitable tools and resources. So just thinking about how you communicate with the residents, whether it's kind of face-to-face meetings, if you have a resident liaison officer within the contract, that's very normal when you're carrying out retrofit work on housing estates or any kind of community. Really, you normally have a resident officer for the landlord and one for the contractor. And I think with that comes installer responsibility as well around keeping a tidy site, making sure the complete noisy works during allowed hours and not outside of those hours, and are sensitive to maybe particular people's needs when there are particularly vulnerable people in certain properties. Just thinking about the tools and resources, this is really about, maybe some of the residents don't have English as a first language, so you might be sharing information through one-to-one meetings, or it could be through emails where people might be able to translate information very easily from an email rather than maybe a printed letter. There's other ways of having kind of community meetings, maybe piggybacking on other kind of community events as well. So if you have some kind of regular community gathering in a community hall or something, then you try and piggyback your retrofit information and communication on the back of that. So you're kind of, maximizing the opportunity with a group of people who are already well established. As a contractor, what will you bring to the contract and to the project? This is really kind of, I suppose, posing the idea that actually resident engagement is a very, very key part of successful delivery of retrofit projects. And from the contractor point of view, I suppose a lot of the residents see the contractor as the person who's kind of responsible for the biggest impact on them through the works. And really managing that closely is very, very important to the success of the projects. If people are unhappy with something that's going on, maybe it's a perceived problem or a real problem, have you got the mechanism in place? Is there a contact point for you as a contractor where they can voice that concern and you can provide a sort of satisfactory response or process or something to them where they can feel that they've been listened to, and that, if possible, maybe it's just that part of the works going on are going to be very disruptive and noisy, and you can reassure them that it won't last long. Or you say that actually, well, what we'll do if this is a particular problem for you is, try and do this work while you're out, if you can tell us when you're going to be out. So you're trying to take them into consideration and their needs. So just a few things. Obviously, previous retrofit projects, an awful lot of the problems that are likely to arise in coming projects have probably happened before. And there's some, good learning and experience from previous projects about the sort of things that are frequently happen or could well be, usual to expect. So old people might well prefer not to have the disruption of retrofits and might decide to, that they don't want to go ahead with work because it's perceived as being too disruptive. Some residents retrofit would negatively impact the home's accessibility. So they might see, if there was some internal wall insulation being proposed, for instance, that internal room spaces, floor spaces, etc., were going to be reduced, and the room sizes might be, not exactly large to start with. Residents might well have sentimental value to elements of their homes. It could well be to do with things like clearing of lofts that often has a kind of traumatic association with people. And there's an awful lot of stuff gets put up in lofts, which can be from, children or relatives or things that people just don't want to deal with. And actually doing loft insulation can really be a problem because of, the storage side of this. Some people don't want to lose that storage and don't really want to have to deal with emptying the loft in order for the works to be done. So that kind of thing, in terms of a service or some kind of assistance for storage or for sorting that stuff out, can help. Mistrust of the landlord, obviously that can be a problem. I know from my own personal experience of going on site, if you're wandering around an estate or something with people from a local authority, It's amazing how people can appear with complaints about all sorts of things because they see someone from the council. They feel that the council hasn't been answering their communications, and there's someone on their doorstep, and they don't want to miss the opportunity to ask or demand some answers. So actually, that kind of level of mistrust of landlords can have a bearing on retrofit works, as with any other works too. So this is really looking at the different stages of a retrofit project and where you might be thinking about the different elements and the importance of engagement in terms of other aspects of the retrofit project. I think really in terms of the engagement with residents needs to happen all the way through. You know, this is a responsibility of the client and the retrofit coordinator. And it's very much something that past 2035, the kind of standard for retrofit, which is demanded compliance with public funded retrofit projects, there is a very much an emphasis on resident engagement and understanding the needs of residents, and then following up once the work has been done, following up with the resident to make sure that they understand what's been done, if there's been changes to heating controls or heating systems, that they understand those, but they are benefiting from the retrofit works as designed. In terms of the installer, there is very much a responsibility through past 2030 that the installation, commissioning and handover of the works part of that installer responsibility. So during installation, the last two stages here on the right-hand side, we've got the minimalisation of disruption for residents and really communicating with the residents to understand how that can be maximised, what sort of sensitivities there are, maybe feeding back stuff to the client as well to say, actually, we've got someone here who really is upset about the noise. Is there somewhere providing some kind of respite care in a community centre or somewhere else just while we're finishing off this work? That's certainly been something I've heard about in terms of maybe older people or people who are very sensitive to noise. They really find it hard to live with. That actually some respite provision has been arranged. Then you've got the handover, which is obviously providing one-to-one support for residents once measures have been installed. So it's kind of walking them through how new controls work, what now that external wall insulation or internal wall insulation being fitted, what kind of things must you not do because you risk damaging that if you've got new ventilation in place and it maybe is on constant, maybe on a sort of background ventilation with a boost facility, but actually it's been installed and designed to run on it being on constantly. Do people understand that? And, they're not tempted to just switch it off because they think it's broken and it shouldn't be running all the time. There's a real, kind of a lot to be said for having a good conversation with the residents so that they really understand how the new building is meant to work. And post-works, that's really back down to the retrofit coordinator doing follow-up checks and really, talking to residents, looking at energy bills and seeing if, the house is performing as it should in terms of residents' energy use and levels of comfort too. So in terms of retrofit engagement, understanding who lives in each home. So I was just describing the different kind of needs and requirements and, make considerations of vulnerable people, etc., who might be living in the homes. Engaging via multiple channels. So it can be face-to-face doorstep conversations. It can be group conversations, maybe through some kind of community activity, emails, leafleting, some kind of online website with a video explanation, maybe some testimonials from previous residents that have had works done, explaining that, yes, maybe there is a bit of disruption and, noise and all the other kind of things that are a problem and you need to put up with, but actually the benefits have been great. So kind of giving people reassurance, providing listening opportunities, so checking in with people just to see if, they're okay with what's going on, if they've got any concerns. Maybe they've heard from a neighbour that, XYZ is a problem, and they're worried about it. It's important to keep up the communication, over communicate rather than under communicate, and be inclusive. So the resident is very much part of the whole project. It's being done for them and not being done to them, but with them. There's just something I've got here, which was taken from the building safety campaign that I thought was quite good. So ensuring that people are heard is an essential part of any retrofit project. Understanding who lives in each home, engaging via multiple channels, providing listening opportunities, communicating with people, and being inclusive with due consideration of who needs to be involved. And I think that sort of very concisely explains that central role, a central position that the residents keep within the project. So some key resident engagement skills. So these are sort of skills that you would really be thinking to have within the remit of housing retrofit. So in the day-to-day kind of process of the installation and construction of the measures, I think that's being sensitive to you are working in and around someone's home. And although they might be a tenant, as opposed to, the home might be owned by the landlord, local authority, housing association, whoever, it is the home of that resident, and they are very emotionally attached to that. So being sensitive to those considerations is very important. Understanding information. So that's information about the home, about the resident, about the measures that you're installing, so that you can kind of communicate if the residents on site. Some people are very interested in what's going on. Some people really don't want to know. But where people are interested, it's great to be able to communicate what the work is, what the benefits might be, in terms of if you're putting a wall insulation on or something like that, then, understanding what that does in terms of the residents' experience after the works are going to be done. Access to information on the project. So I suppose that's really thinking about the overall project aims and ambitions, awareness of support events, as well as existing or additional support as a tenant. So that could be relating to, like we were saying, in terms of the community activity and communication with people. And there's also obviously opportunity, I think, for the resident liaison officers to be explaining where a project has got to. Things aren't all being done at the same time. They tend to be done in stages. And actually, you're keeping people aware by having those events to say, we're at this stage where, we've started construction on, the first stage, we'll be doing your block in 2 months' time. So you expect to see sort of plants and equipment and on-site facilities turning up before that. Improvement in confidence using digital software. So that's really just thinking about the kind of ways that you will be communicating about, the upgrades to homes, and that, the residents can be able to, you as an installer or a resident liaison officer, or if you're possibly involved in the PAS process, you might well be able to explain to residents using, a laptop or some kind of digital pad, be able to show videos or some kind of walkthrough of what different measures are going to look like, what they're going to do, how long they take to install, what's involved, all that kind of stuff. So just thinking about the retrofit handover, evaluation and monitoring. So this is the bit where you're basically communicating once works have been completed, what customers, as in the residents, will need to know in terms of understanding the use of systems, any anomalies and how to identify those. So this is something that it's more than just handing over an information book and saying everything you need to know is in there. It's about making sure that people understand, the changes. You ask them questions about what they think is the new way of using their home, or new considerations to have, and what's important about maybe the ventilation system or the heating controls, or if you put new windows in, to leave the trickle vents on, because the home is now much more airtight, and in order to stop the risk of mold and damp, we need to have background ventilation on, which is trickle vents open. as we know, quite a lot of people, and certainly in homes I visited, have damp and mold problems, and then you notice all the trickle vents are being taped up. So actual performance versus design calculations, this is something that people involved in the PAS 2035 process, retrofit coordinators would be involved in. Generally, you'd just be doing fairly high level checks, just looking at energy bills and talking about whether someone feels comfortable in their home after one of the first heating season after the retrofit work. You would talk to the resident and see if if they've got any issues around comfort and warmth, energy bills, anything like that. And then you look at the energy consumption data and see if it's sort of in line with what is expected. And if it's not, then you might start delving deeper as to why, that isn't performing as expected. Checking on the commissioning warranty and any defects clauses with those measures that have been installed. So the retrofit coordinator again would be keeping information about when commissioning was done, any warranties on different products that have been done. So there'd be different warranties at different lengths of time for EWI systems or windows or, heat pumps or anything else that's been installed. There'll be some kind of warranty there, and any defects clauses as well. And then obviously thinking about customer support, if and when problems arise and who to contact, even if it's just concerns that, aren't a problem, but just need some sort of hand-holding and explanation back to the resident. It also goes a long way to have that kind of customer support facility in place. So this is just a quick example. So where you do have rural communities and you basically don't have people, with easy access to internet connections and all that kind of stuff. This really was a district called Rydale, which has one of the highest fuel poverty levels nationally. So this is just an example of how a converted bus was used to tour areas, just spreading the word about retrofit opportunity, asking people to attend, not on that particular bus, asking people to attend events based around this kind of retrofit bus, if you like. Also, they would hire village halls and hosting local community events to engage people and talk about retrofit, talk about the benefits, talk about, reducing energy costs, improving comfort, and linking to carbon emissions and climate change. And also we're linking with the ward and parish councillors, again, how to spread the different channels that you can use and get on side to spread the message about retrofit. They all have, their own networks and their own kind of communication channels, but they can be very effective tools to help get people on board and get their appetites whetted about the opportunities for retrofit and the benefits. A few just quick considerations to make. Should be wrapping up this. I'll rattle through these quite quickly now. So non-English speaking residents, that first point, basically a letter through the door, but written in English, is not necessarily the most accessible for non-English speaking residents. As I mentioned earlier, an email outlining potential works written in English is easy to translate using various bits of software. Although you probably could actually, with some kind of app on a phone, take a photograph of a letter, but it's easier to do that with straight text from an email if that's needed. Residents with disabilities, so vulnerable residents. In-person events might not be suited to disabled residents, so engaging via remote methods can be much more effective. Email outlining potential works, use of social media, and maybe telephone calls would also be more suitable for some residents. So I touched on PAS 2035 earlier. I don't know, certainly some of the supply chain would be involved directly in providing services around PAS 2035. So the retrofit coordinator and retrofit assessors do need to have specific qualifications to do those jobs within PAS 2035. And this is basically, as I said earlier, it's a requirement for public funded and energy company obligation retrofit projects. And there's also a section 20 of the Landlord and Tenant Act, which also has a clause in it about resident engagement. So retrofit contractors, to ensure that the well-being of residents are central to the planning and delivery of installation works, that is within PAS 2035, it states that, and social landlords to consult leaseholders who may well be affected. So these are requirements within the PAS standard, within the Landlord and Tenant Act as well. So it is very much seen as a requirement. So just touching on a few other things that can help in terms of information relating to resident engagement that you can access through the website. There's a few examples here. And on the website, we've got various other resources just itemized there. And there are links through the presentation as well to those resources. And that is it for this presentation. So hopefully that has been informative and helpful.